The stagecoach rumbled to a halt, dust billowing around its wooden wheels, as it stopped before the small wooden station of Goldfield, Nevada. The year was 1876, and like many frontier towns that had sprung up during the silver and gold rushes, Goldfield was a place of opportunity and hardship in equal measure. Jane Nichols clutched her worn leather satchel with one hand and held onto her sleeping 4-year-old daughter with the other, while her son, equally exhausted from the grueling journey, leaned against her skirt. Goldfield Station. End of the line for this route. The driver called out, his voice carrying on the hot desert air. Jane's heart pounded against her ribcage. This very moment would determine whether the desperate gamble she had taken would save her children or doom them all. She hadn't been completely honest in her letters to Matthew Vance, the rancher who had advertised for a mail-order bride. She had mentioned her cooking skills, her ability to keep a home, her willingness to be a good wife, but not once had she mentioned Tommy and Sarah, the twins who were her entire world. The station master approached, offering a hand to help her down from the coach. "Madam, you need assistance with your little ones there." "Yes, please," Jane replied, her voice barely audible over the pounding in her ears. "Could you help Tommy down while I carry Sarah?" The kind-faced older man nodded, lifting the sleepy boy and setting him gently on the dusty ground. "You must be the bride Mr. Vance is expecting," he said with a knowing smile. "He's been coming into town every day this week asking if the stage had arrived yet." Jane felt a flush of guilt wash over her. "Yes, I'm Jane Nichols. These are my children, Tommy and Sarah." The station master's eyebrows rose slightly. "Don't recall Mr. Vance mentioning children." "No," Jane admitted softly. "He wouldn't have." Before the station master could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A tall man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion came into view, dust trailing behind horse and rider as they approached the station. Jane's breath caught in her throat. This had to be Matthew Vance, her future husband, assuming he didn't turn them away on the spot. Matthew Vance had spent the morning mending fences on the north side of his property, but as noon approached, he couldn't ignore the anticipation building inside him. Today was the day Jane Nichols was supposed to arrive from Boston. After 3 years of solitude following his father's death, the ranch had become too quiet, too empty for one man. A man needed family to make a house a home, to give purpose to the hard work and long days. As he approached the stagecoach, his eyes immediately found the woman standing beside it. She was slender, with honey-brown hair peeking out from beneath a modest bonnet, and she wore a travel-worn blue dress that had seen better days. But it wasn't her appearance that made Matthew pull his horse up short. It was the 2 small children beside her. A boy and a girl looking to be the same age, both with the same honey-brown hair as the woman. For a moment, Matthew sat frozen atop his horse, his mind racing. Children. There had been no mention of children in any of her letters. He'd been prepared to welcome a wife, but this was something else entirely. Jane watched the man's expression change as he registered the presence of her twins. Her heart sank. She had known this was a possibility, perhaps even a probability. What man would want to take on another man's children? Especially twins who required double the care, double the food, double everything. "Mr. Vance," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm Jane Nichols." Matthew dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving the small family before him. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave to it. His face was tanned from years in the Nevada sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted at both laughter and hardship. "Miss Nichols," he said, approaching them, "I see you've arrived safely." "Yes," Jane replied, then took a deep breath. Mr. Vance, I need to be honest with you. These are my children, Tommy and Sarah. They're 4 years old. I didn't mention them in my letters, and I understand if that changes things for you." The twins looked up at the tall stranger, Tommy with curiosity and Sarah with apprehension, clutching her mother's skirts tighter. Matthew knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the children. "Hello there," he said gently. "I'm Matthew. You must be tired after such a long journey." "We came on a big train," Tommy announced proudly. "And then in this bouncy coach. Were you scared?" Matthew asked. Tommy shook his head vigorously. "No, sir, I was brave for Mama and Sarah." A small smile tugged at Matthew's lips. He stood and met Jane's anxious gaze. She was preparing herself for rejection. He could see it in the way she held herself, rigid and ready for disappointment. "Miss Nichols," he said slowly, "you should have told me about your children." "I know," Jane whispered. "I was afraid you wouldn't consider me if you knew. After their father died, I've struggled to provide for them in Boston. The factory work was killing me slowly, and I couldn't bear the thought of my children going hungry or being separated in an orphanage if something happened to me." Her voice broke. "I understand if you want to dissolve our arrangement. We can stay in town until I figure out what to do next." Matthew was quiet for a long moment, studying the small family before him. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "I always wanted a family," he said simply. "I just figured it would take longer to have one." Jane's eyes widened. "You're not angry?" Surprised, yes. "Angry? No." Matthew reached down and, after a moment's hesitation, picked up Tommy, who giggled at suddenly being so high up. "A ranch is no place for just one person. It's meant to be filled with life." Tears welled in Jane's eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to cry in front of the station master and the few curious onlookers who had gathered. "Well then," Matthew continued, "we should get you all home before the afternoon heat really sets in." "Are these all your belongings?" he asked, gesturing to the two modest trunks the stagecoach driver was unloading. "Yes," Jane nodded. "We traveled light." "That's all right. Whatever you need we can get in town or make do." Matthew handed Tommy back to Jane and lifted both trunks with ease, securing them to the back of his horse. "I brought the wagon for you and your things. It's just around the corner." As they walked toward the wagon, Jane felt both relief and a new kind of anxiety. Matthew Vance had not turned them away, but what kind of man was he, really? The letters they had exchanged over the past 6 months had revealed a straightforward, hard-working rancher with a decent parcel of land and a solid reputation in the community. But letters could hide as much as they revealed. The wagon was simple but sturdy, with a canvas cover to shield passengers from the sun. Matthew helped Jane and the twins up onto the bench seat, then climbed up beside them and took the reins. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch," he explained as they set off, his horse tied to the back of the wagon. "Not too far, as ranches go around here, closer to town than most, which is a blessing when winter sets in." Jane nodded, feeling the warmth of Sarah pressed against one side and the solid presence of Matthew on the other. Tommy had insisted on sitting next to the rancher and was already peppering him with questions. "You have cows and horses. Can I ride a horse?" "Mama said maybe when I'm bigger, but I'm already big now," Matthew chuckled. "I do have cattle and horses, and maybe we can start teaching you to ride a gentle old mare I have. She's perfect for beginners." Tommy's eyes lit up with excitement, but Jane interjected, "Mr. Vance, you don't have to, Matthew, please," he corrected her. "And it's no trouble. Every ranch child learns to ride young. It's as necessary as walking out here." As they left the small town behind and traveled across the open land, Jane was struck by the vastness of the landscape. Boston had been crowded, buildings pressed against buildings, people everywhere. Here the land stretched out in all directions, with mountains in the distance and sagebrush dotting the terrain. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Matthew glanced at her, surprised. "Most Eastern women find it desolate at first." "It's different," Jane agreed. "But there's something powerful about all this space, like you can breathe properly for the first time." A small smile tugged at Matthew's lips. "That's exactly right." They fell into a companionable silence broken only by Tommy's occasional exclamations at seeing jackrabbits or distant cattle. Sarah remained quiet, her head eventually dropping onto Jane's lap as she fell asleep again. Finally, Matthew pointed ahead. "There it is, Vance Ranch." Jane saw a modest but well-maintained ranch house made of sturdy logs with a wide front porch. Several outbuildings surrounded it, a barn, what looked like a bunkhouse, and various sheds. A corral held several horses, and beyond, she could see cattle grazing on the rolling hills. "It's not fancy," Matthew said, a hint of apology in his voice, "but it's solid. My father and I built most of it ourselves." "It's wonderful," Jane said honestly. After years of cramped tenement living, the ranch house looked like a palace. As they pulled up to the hitching post in front of the house, the front door opened and an older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Ellis," Matthew called out. "Come meet Jane Nichols and her children, Tommy and Sarah." The gray-haired woman's surprise was evident as her gaze landed on the twins, but she recovered quickly. "Well now, aren't you all a sight for sore eyes? I've been cooking up a welcome feast fit for royalty, but I'll need to add a bit more to feed these little ones properly. Mrs. Ellis comes in 3 days a week to help with cooking and cleaning," Matthew explained to Jane. "She was my mother's friend before Mom passed." "It's lovely to meet you," Jane said sincerely. "We don't want to be any trouble." "Nonsense," Mrs. Ellis replied. "I've been telling Matthew for years that this house needs more life in it. Come inside now, you must be exhausted from your journey." As Matthew helped them down from the wagon, Jane caught his eye. "Thank you," she said softly. "Most men would have sent us straight back to Boston." "I'm not most men," he replied simply, then added with a small smile, "and I meant what I said. I always wanted a family, I just never expected it to arrive all at once." For the first time since leaving Boston, Jane felt a flicker of real hope. Perhaps this desperate gamble would work out after all. Inside, the ranch house was plain but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, if worn, furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a wooden dining table capable of seating 8 to one side. A cast iron stove anchored the kitchen area, where Mrs. Ellis was already adding more potatoes to a pot of stew. "Let me show you around," Matthew offered. "It's not a mansion, but there's room enough for everyone." He led them down a short hallway off the main room. "This was my parents' room," he said, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small dressing table. "It's yours now. I've been using the smaller bedroom across the hall." "Oh, but I couldn't take your parents' room," Jane protested. "It's been empty for 3 years," Matthew replied. "It should be used, and it's the largest bedroom, which makes sense for you and the children until we can arrange something more permanent." Jane's cheeks colored slightly at the implication. They hadn't yet discussed the sleeping arrangements after they were married, assuming they still would be married. As if reading her thoughts, Matthew cleared his throat. "We should talk about our arrangement, Jane. Things have changed from what we agreed upon in our letters." Jane nodded. "Of course, the children change everything." "Not everything," Matthew said quietly, then more briskly, "but we can discuss it after you've rested and had something to eat. You've had a long journey." While Mrs. Ellis finished preparing their meal, Jane helped the twins wash up in the basin Matthew provided. Tommy was chattering excitedly about all the animals he was going to see, while Sarah remained quiet and watchful, as was her nature. "What do you think of Mr. Vance?" Jane asked them as she helped Sarah change into a clean dress. "He's tall," Tommy declared, "and he said I can learn to ride a horse. He seems nice," Sarah said softly. "He didn't yell when he saw us." Jane's heart clenched at her daughter's words. Sarah had been expecting rejection just as much as Jane had. "Yes, he does seem nice. And we're going to try very hard to make a good home here with him, aren't we?" Both children nodded solemnly, understanding in their young way that their future depended on making this work. Dinner was a hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread that had Jane and the children eating more enthusiastically than they had in months. Factory wages had rarely stretched far enough for proper meals, especially in the last year as prices rose and work became scarcer. "My goodness, these children were hungry," Mrs. Ellis remarked, pleased to see them enjoying her cooking. "Growing children need good food." "They haven't had as much as they should lately," Jane admitted. "Times have been hard in Boston." Matthew watched the family eat, noting how Jane made sure each child had enough before taking much for herself. It told him a great deal about her character and the struggles they had faced. After dinner, Mrs. Ellis insisted on cleaning up, shooing Jane away when she tried to help. "You rest tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to learn where everything goes." With the twins beginning to droop with tiredness, Jane excused herself to put them to bed. In the bedroom Matthew had given them, she tucked them into the large bed, singing softly until both were asleep. Then she slipped back out to the main room where Matthew sat by the fireplace despite the warm evening. "They're asleep," she said, hovering uncertainly by the doorway. "Come sit," he invited, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "Mrs. Ellis has gone home for the night." Jane sat, smoothing her skirt nervously. "I owe you a full explanation," she began. "You don't owe me anything," Matthew countered, "but I would like to understand your situation better." Jane took a deep breath. "My husband, Robert, died when the children were just 6 months old. Influenza took him in a matter of days. We weren't wealthy to begin with, but after his death, I had to leave our small apartment and find work in the textile mills. The work was grueling, the pay meager, and I had to leave the twins with a neighbor who charged nearly as much as I made." She twisted her hands in her lap. "This past winter was particularly hard. The mills cut hours and Tommy got sick. The doctor's bills." She shook her head. "I was desperate. When I saw your advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like Providence. A chance to give my children a better life, away from the smoke and grime of the city." "Why didn't you tell me about them in your letters?" Matthew asked, his voice gentle rather than accusatory. "Because no man wants another man's children," Jane replied bluntly. "At least, that's what I've found to be true. I had placed 2 previous responses to mail-order bride advertisements, and both men withdrew their offers when I mentioned the twins." She met his gaze directly. "It was wrong of me not to tell you, dishonest and unfair. But I was desperate, Mr. Vance Matthew, desperate enough to risk the journey west on the small chance you might be different from the others." Matthew was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I understand desperation," he said finally. "After my father died, I nearly lost this place. There were debts I didn't know about and a drought that nearly wiped out the herd. I did things I'm not proud of to keep this ranch." "You don't have to honor our arrangement," Jane said quietly. "I deceived you, and I accept the consequences. All I ask is a little time to find work in town and get on our feet." Matthew leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Jane, when I sent for a mail-order bride, I wasn't just looking for a housekeeper or even just a wife. I was looking for companionship, for someone to share my life with. I was looking for a family," He smiled slightly. You've brought me an instant family, which is more than I ever hoped for. Jane's eyes widened. You truly don't mind the children, mind them? No, they're wonderful. Tommy has the makings of a fine rancher already. Did you see how he was studying everything as we rode in? And Sarah, she's quiet but observant. She notices everything. They're good children, Jane agreed, pride evident in her voice. I'd still like to marry you, Jane, Matthew said directly. But I understand if you need time to get to know me first. We can delay the ceremony if you prefer. Jane considered his offer. Delaying would be the sensible thing to do to learn more about this man before binding her life to his. But delay also meant uncertainty, and she had risked everything on this journey. In our letters, she said slowly, I felt I came to know a decent, honorable man. Your actions today have shown me that my impression was correct. If you're still willing to marry me, knowing everything, then I would be honored to become your wife. Matthew's smile lit his entire face. Then I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with the preacher, unless you'd prefer to wait a few days to rest from your journey. No, Jane replied, surprising herself with her certainty. I'd like to begin our new life properly as soon as possible. Then it's settled, Matthew said, standing and offering her his hand to help her up. We'll be married tomorrow afternoon if Preacher Jenkins is available. Jane placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. His hand was warm, strong, and surprisingly gentle as it closed around hers. Tomorrow, she agreed, and for the first time in years, the future didn't seem like something to fear. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Jane woke early, habit from years of factory work making it impossible to sleep past sunrise. She slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to disturb the twins who were still sleeping soundly. In the kitchen, she found Matthew already up, coffee brewing on the stove. Good morning, he greeted her. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in years, Jane admitted. That bed is a luxury after what we've been used to. Matthew poured her a cup of coffee. I was thinking of riding into town after breakfast to speak with the preacher. Would noon be too soon for the ceremony? We could have a small celebration here afterward. Jane accepted the cup gratefully. Noon would be fine, though I'm afraid I don't have anything suitable to wear for a wedding. This, she gestured to her plain blue dress, is my best. You look beautiful as you are, Matthew said sincerely, then flushed slightly at his own forwardness. But if you'd like something special, Mrs. Ellis mentioned she has a daughter about your size who might have something you could borrow. Jane smiled. That's very kind of her. I'd like that if it's no trouble. They worked together preparing breakfast, moving around each other in the kitchen with surprising ease, as if they'd been doing so for years rather than hours. By the time the twins woke up, rubbing sleep from their eyes, the table was set with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Mr. Matthew, Tommy exclaimed upon seeing him. Can we see the horses today, after breakfast? Matthew promised. And I have news for both of you. Your mother and I are going to be married today. Do you know what that means? Tommy nodded vigorously. It means you'll be our new pa, like Billy Thompson's new pa after his real pa went to heaven. Matthew glanced at Jane, who nodded slightly. They had explained to the children before bedtime that Matthew might become their new father. That's right, Matthew confirmed. If that's all right with you too. Sarah, who had been quiet until now, looked up at Matthew with solemn eyes. Will we live here forever now? No more moving. No more moving, Matthew assured her. This is your home now. Sarah seemed to consider this, then nodded once decisively. Good, I like it here. It's quiet and it smells nice. Jane laughed, relief evident in the sound. High praise from Sarah. She doesn't give her approval easily. After breakfast, true to his word, Matthew took the twins to see the horses while Jane washed the dishes. Through the window, She could see him lifting each child up to pet the nose of a gentle mare, explaining something that had both children nodding seriously. The sight brought tears to her eyes. She had hoped only for security and safety when she'd answered Matthew's advertisement. She hadn't dared hope for kindness, for someone who would embrace her children so readily. Mrs. Ellis arrived mid-morning, arms full of packages and a beautiful cream-colored dress draped carefully over them. "My Josephine wore this for her wedding 3 years ago," she explained as she laid it out on the bed. "She's a bit taller than you, but I can take up the hem in no time. And look, I've brought ribbons for the little girl's hair and a proper tie for the boy." "Mrs. Ellis, this is too generous," Jane protested. "Nonsense," the older woman replied briskly. "Matthew Vance is like a son to me, and I've prayed for years that he'd find happiness. You and these children are the answer to those prayers, whether you know it or not." With Mrs. Ellis's help, Jane was transformed. The cream dress was simply cut but made of fine material that draped beautifully. Mrs. Ellis pinned her hair up in a style more elegant than Jane could have managed herself, and even produced a small bunch of wildflowers for her to carry. "Matthew rode into town an hour ago," Mrs. Ellis informed her as she put the finishing touches on Jane's hair. "He'll be back with the preacher soon, and I took the liberty of inviting a few neighbors to stand as witnesses and join us for a small celebration afterward." Jane's nerves fluttered. "I didn't expect guests. Just a handful," Mrs. Ellis assured her. "The McIntyres from the next ranch over, Doc Wilson and his wife, and the Johnsons who run the general store. They're all good people who have known Matthew for years." When Matthew returned with Preacher Jenkins, the small group of neighbors had already arrived. Jane waited in the bedroom with the twins, who were scrubbed clean and dressed in their best clothes, now adorned with Mrs. Ellis's thoughtful additions. "You look like a princess, Mama," Sarah whispered, touching the cream fabric reverently. "And you look like a little princess yourself," Jane replied, smoothing a hand over her daughter's shining hair, now adorned with a pale blue ribbon that matched her eyes. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Ellis. "Everything's ready," she announced. "The preacher is waiting, and Matthew looks handsome enough to make any bride's heart flutter." Jane took a deep breath, took each twin by the hand, and followed Mrs. Ellis out to the main room. The furniture had been rearranged to create a small space before the fireplace, where Matthew and Preacher Jenkins stood waiting. The neighbors stood in a small semicircle, smiling warmly as Jane appeared, but Jane barely noticed them. Her eyes were fixed on Matthew, who was dressed in a clean black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, those kind blue eyes that had accepted her children without hesitation, were watching her with unmistakable admiration. As she approached with the twins, Matthew stepped forward to meet them halfway, offering his arm to Jane and his other hand to Sarah, who took it shyly. Tommy, not to be outdone, marched ahead to stand by the preacher, assuming an important role for himself in the proceedings. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Jane and Matthew exchanged simple vows, promising to honor, cherish, and support one another for the rest of their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew leaned down to place a gentle, almost tentative kiss on Jane's lips there first. "I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Vance," Preacher Jenkins announced to the small gathering, who broke into enthusiastic applause. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Mrs. Ellis had prepared a feast, and the neighbors had brought additional dishes and small gifts. The McIntyres brought a handmade quilt, the Johnsons a set of children's books, and Doc Wilson presented them with a bottle of fine whiskey for medicinal purposes. He said with a wink. Throughout the afternoon, Jane observed Matthew with their guests. He was respected by these people, that much was clear. They sought his opinion on matters ranging from cattle prices to the railroad's expansion plans. He was thoughtful in his responses, neither boastful nor hesitant. "Your new husband is one of the finest men in the territory, Mrs. Johnson told Jane as they watched Matthew showing Tommy how to properly shake hands with the menfolk. When the Wilson Ranch was in trouble last year during the drought, Matthew drove his own cattle 10 miles to their watering hole when theirs dried up, saved their herd and probably their ranch. "He seems to be a good man," Jane agreed, her eyes following her new husband. "He is," Mrs. Johnson confirmed. "Lost his mother young and his father worked him hard but never managed to harden his heart. You're lucky to have found each other." As the sun began to set, the guests took their leave, offering final congratulations and extracting promises of visits soon. Finally, only the new family remained along with Mrs. Ellis, who was finishing the cleaning up. "I'll be on my way now," she announced, untying her apron. "There's food enough for the next 2 days in the pantry, and I've made up a special dinner for tonight that just needs warming." After she left, a new kind of awkwardness descended on the house. The twins, exhausted from the excitement and unaccustomed attention, were drooping visibly. "I should get them to bed," Jane said, suddenly shy with this man who was now her husband. "Of course," Matthew nodded. "I'll check on the animals while you do that." Jane was grateful for his understanding as she led the twins to what was now their family bedroom. She helped them undress and wash, listening to Tommy's excited recounting of all the people he'd met and the promise of horse riding lessons from Mr. McIntyre's son. "And Mr. Matthew is our pa now, right, Mama?" he asked as she tucked him in. "Yes, he is," Jane confirmed. "What do you think about that?" "I like him," Tommy declared. "He knows everything about horses and cows, and he said I can help him with chores when I'm bigger." Jane smiled and turned to Sarah. "And what about you, sweetheart? What do you think of Mr. Matthew?" Sarah considered the question with her usual seriousness. "He has kind eyes," she finally said. "And he picked me up so I could see the baby birds in the nest by the barn. I couldn't reach, but he made sure I could see them without touching them." Jane's heart swelled. Matthew had found ways to connect with each child, noticing their individual personalities and interests. After the twins were asleep, Jane changed out of the borrowed wedding dress and into her nightgown, covering it with a modest robe. She found Matthew in the main room stoking the fire despite the mild evening. "The children are asleep," she informed him, hovering uncertainly near the hallway. Matthew straightened up, setting the poker aside. "They've had quite a day, we all have." "Yes," Jane agreed, twisting her hands together nervously. "Matthew, I want to thank you again for accepting all of us into your home and your life. You've given us a chance that few others would have." Matthew crossed to her, gently taking her restless hands in his. "Jane, you don't need to thank me. When I first saw you standing there with the twins, I was surprised, yes. But in that moment, I also saw exactly what I'd been missing all these years without even knowing it." His voice dropped lower. "I meant what I said in our vows today. I will honor and cherish you and the children for as long as I live." Jane looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I believe you," she whispered, "and I will do everything in my power to be a good wife to you and to make this house a real home." Matthew smiled, releasing one of her hands to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "It already feels more like a home than it has in years." Their second kiss was less tentative than the first, a gentle exploration that held the promise of deeper feeling to come. When they parted, both were slightly breathless. "Mrs. Ellis left us dinner," Jane said, her cheeks flushed. "I'm not particularly hungry right now," Matthew admitted. "Are you?" Jane shook her head. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts and new awareness. "Jane," Matthew finally said, his voice husky, "I want you to know that I understand we're still strangers in many ways. I don't expect." He cleared his throat. "That is to say, I'm content to wait until you're comfortable with the idea of being truly married." Jane's blush deepened, but she met his gaze directly. "You've been so generous with me, Matthew, with us. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." Matthew's eyes darkened and he stepped closer, drawing her gently into his arms. "Are you certain?" In answer, Jane rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. This time, there was nothing tentative about their kiss. Later, much later, as they lay together in what was now their bedroom, the twins having been carefully moved to the small bedroom across the hall, Jane rested her head on Matthew's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I never expected this," she murmured. "When I decided to become a mail-order bride, I hoped only for security, for a safe place to raise my children. I didn't dare hope for happiness." Matthew's hand stroked gently through her hair, which now fell loose around her shoulders. "And are you happy?" Jane raised her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his eyes that matched her own. "Yes," she said simply, "I am." His smile was like the sunrise breaking slowly across his face. "Good," he whispered, pulling her close again. "So am I." The weeks that followed their wedding were a time of adjustment for all of them. Jane learned the rhythms of ranch life, which were so different from the regimented schedule of factory work. Matthew learned what it meant to have children in the house, the noise, the constant questions, the small shoes left where he might trip over them. But they were good weeks, filled with small discoveries and growing bonds. Jane proved to be an excellent cook when given proper ingredients to work with, and Matthew found himself looking forward to meals in a way he hadn't in years. The twins quickly adapted to their new home, with Tommy following Matthew around like a shadow whenever possible, and Sarah discovering a love for the wildflowers that grew in profusion around the property. A month after the wedding, Matthew surprised Jane by bringing home a piano he'd purchased from a family moving back east. "It's not new," he apologized, as the men he'd hired to transport it positioned it against the wall in the main room. "And it will need tuning, but you mentioned in one of your letters that you used to play, and I thought—" He trailed off as Jane launched herself into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "It's the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me," she said between sobs. "My mother taught me to play when I was a girl, but after she died, we had to sell our piano. I haven't played in years." That evening, after the piano tuner had done his work, Jane sat down and tentatively played a simple melody. Her fingers were stiff from years of factory work and lack of practice, but the music that filled the house brought a light to her eyes that Matthew hadn't seen before. "Will you teach us, Mama?" Sarah asked, watching her mother's fingers move over the keys. "If you'd like to learn, yes," Jane agreed. "Not me," Tommy declared. "I want to learn to rope cattle like Pa." It was the first time either child had called Matthew Pa to his face, and the rancher felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Well then," he said, his voice slightly rough, "we'll start your lessons tomorrow, Cowboy." Summer gave way to fall, and the ranch prepared for winter. Matthew found in Jane a true partner, someone whose strength and determination matched his own. She learned quickly, asking intelligent questions about the business side of ranching and offering suggestions that often proved valuable. The children thrived in their new environment. Tommy's earlier declaration held true. He wanted nothing more than to be a rancher like his new father, soaking up every bit of knowledge Matthew shared. Sarah, quieter but equally determined, revealed a talent for nurturing things. She started a small garden near the house with Jane's help, and showed a special touch with the animals, particularly the orphaned lambs and calves that sometimes needed hand-rearing. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the children had gone to bed, Jane turned to Matthew with a nervous smile. "I have something to tell you," she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Matthew looked at her, concern crossing his features. "Is something wrong?" "No," Jane assured him quickly. "Nothing's wrong, in fact." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby, our baby, in the spring." For a moment, Matthew sat perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with a whoop that probably startled the cattle in the nearby pasture, he swept Jane up from her chair and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby!" he exclaimed, setting her carefully back down but keeping his arms around her. "Jane, that's wonderful news." Jane laughed, relieved by his reaction. "You're happy then?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Matthew replied, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Another little one to love. Tommy and Sarah will be excited to have a brother or sister." "I think so," Jane agreed. "Though Sarah has already informed me that she'd prefer a sister, as she has quite enough of brothers already." Matthew chuckled. "Well, we'll have to see what we get, won't we? Boy or girl, this child will be welcomed and loved, just like Tommy and Sarah." Jane leaned into his embrace, marveling at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. From desperate widow to beloved wife, from struggling factory worker to respected rancher's wife, from fearing for her children's future to anticipating the arrival of another child, a child conceived in love. Winter in Nevada proved milder than the brutal Boston winters Jane was accustomed to, but it brought its own challenges. Snowstorms sometimes isolated the ranch for days at a time, and the work of caring for livestock didn't pause for bad weather. But the Vance family found joy in the season. Matthew taught the twins to ice skate on the frozen pond near the house, and Jane baked cookies using recipes Mrs. Ellis shared. At Christmas, they cut a small pine from their own land and decorated it with ornaments Matthew's mother had saved from her childhood, carefully preserved in tissue paper in the attic. On Christmas morning, Tommy and Sarah were delighted with the gifts Matthew had commissioned from the town's woodworker, a small rocking horse for Tommy, and a doll with a pine cradle for Sarah. "And this is for you," Matthew said, handing Jane a small, wrapped package after the children were busy with their new toys. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of the twins on one side. "The other side is for the new baby when it arrives," Matthew explained. Jane touched the locket reverently. "It's beautiful, Matthew. I'll treasure it always." She reached under the tree for a package of her own. "And this is for you." Matthew unwrapped the gift to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Jane, this is perfect. Did you make it yourself?" Jane nodded. "Mrs. Ellis helped me learn. I wanted to give you something made with my own hands." He wrapped the scarf around his neck immediately, though they were indoors by a warm fire. "I'll wear it proudly." As winter slowly gave way to spring, Jane's pregnancy progressed. Her body rounded with new life, and Matthew found himself captivated by the changes, placing his hands on her growing belly to feel their child's movements. The twins had adapted to the idea of a new sibling with enthusiasm. Tommy had appointed himself special protector of his mother, carrying her sewing basket and fetching her shawl when evenings turned cool. Sarah spent hours talking seriously to Jane's belly, explaining all the important things the baby would need to know about their home and family. In late April, as wildflowers began to carpet the rangeland, Jane went into labor. Mrs. Ellis and Doc Wilson's wife attended her, while Matthew paced the porch with the twins, answering their questions about where babies came from with increasingly creative evasions. After 6 hours of labor, easy as shelling peas, Mrs. Ellis declared, though Jane might have disagreed. A healthy baby boy entered the world, announcing his arrival with a robust cry. "Matthew," Mrs. Ellis called from the doorway, "come meet your son." Matthew rushed inside, the twins at his heels, to find Jane propped up in bed, her face tired but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "A son," she said softly as Matthew approached. "He has your eyes, I think." Matthew sat carefully on the edge of the bed, gazing in wonder at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket. "He's perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." "Can we see?" Tommy demanded, trying to climb onto the bed. "Gently now," Matthew cautioned, lifting first Tommy, then Sarah to sit carefully beside Jane. "He's so small," Sarah observed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's hand. Immediately, tiny fingers curled around hers in a surprisingly strong grip. "Oh, he's holding my hand, Mama." "He knows his big sister," Jane smiled. "And his big brother," she added as Tommy leaned in for a closer look. "What's his name?" Tommy wanted to know. Jane and Matthew exchanged a glance. They had discussed names but hadn't made a final decision. "What do you think we should call him?" Matthew asked the twins. Tommy considered the question seriously. "How about Buffalo or Sheriff?" Jane laughed. "Those are very exciting names, but perhaps not quite right for a baby." "What about Joseph?" Sarah suggested. "Like in my Bible story book, he had a coat of many colors." Matthew looked at Jane. "Joseph, I like it." "Joseph Robert Vance," Jane said softly. "Robert for my first husband, to honor his memory." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Joseph Robert it is then." That night, after the twins were finally asleep, exhausted from the excitement, and Mrs. Ellis had gone home with promises to return in the morning, Matthew sat beside Jane on their bed. Baby Joseph was sleeping in the cradle Matthew had built during the winter months, positioned close to Jane's side of the bed. "Thank you," Matthew said, taking Jane's hand in his. "For what?" Jane asked, though she thought she knew. "For everything. For answering my advertisement, for bringing Tommy and Sarah into my life, for giving me Joseph, for making this house a home." Jane squeezed his hand. "I should be thanking you. You took a chance on us when most men wouldn't have. You opened your heart to children who weren't your own. You gave us all a home and a family when we needed it most." Matthew shook his head. "It wasn't charity, Jane. From the moment I saw you standing there with the twins, something inside me just knew this was my family. The family I'd been waiting for without even realizing it." Jane's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Matthew Vance." It was the first time she had said the words aloud, though she had felt them growing in her heart for months. Matthew's breath caught. "And I love you, Jane Vance. With all my heart." He leaned down to kiss her, a kiss that spoke of all they had overcome and all they had yet to experience together. From his cradle, baby Joseph made a small sound, and both parents turned to look at their newest family member. In that moment, Jane felt a sense of completion, of rightness. Her journey from desperate widow to beloved wife and mother again had been unexpected and not without challenges. But as she looked at her husband gazing adoringly at their son, she knew it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, the Vance ranch had prospered and grown. Matthew's careful management and Jane's practical assistance had allowed them to expand their holdings and increase their herd. The original ranch house had been expanded too, with additional bedrooms built to accommodate their growing family. Joseph, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quiet determination, had been joined by a sister, Elizabeth, who at 3 was already showing signs of being the most strong-willed of all the Vance children. The twins, now 9, had grown tall and confident in the security of their family. Tommy was every inch the young rancher, accompanying Matthew on his rounds whenever permitted and showing a natural affinity for horsemanship that made his stepfather proud. Sarah's gentle nature had blossomed along with her garden, which now supplied the family with vegetables and flowers year-round. She had also inherited her mother's musical talent and practiced diligently on the piano each day. On a warm summer evening, as the family gathered on the expanded front porch after dinner, Jane looked around at the life they had built together. Matthew sat in his favorite chair, little Elizabeth on his lap demanding, "One more story, Papa." Tommy and Joseph were engaged in an elaborate game involving rope and sticks that appeared to be some form of cattle roundup. Sarah sat on the porch steps, sketching the sunset in a book Matthew had given her for her last birthday. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Vance," Matthew said, looking up from Elizabeth's golden curls to catch Jane watching them all with a soft smile. "I was just thinking how fortunate we are," Jane replied, resting a hand on her slightly rounded belly where their 5th child third together was growing. "All of this from one desperate gamble." Matthew smiled, the same smile that still made her heart beat faster after all these years together. "The best gamble I ever made was sending for a mail-order bride," he said, "though I got more than I bargained for. Any regrets?" Jane asked teasingly, already knowing the answer. Matthew looked around at their children, then back at his wife, his gaze warm with love and contentment. "Not a single one," he said firmly. "I always wanted a family. I just didn't know how perfect that family would be." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Nevada sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the Vance family remained on their porch, together in the home they had built with love, perseverance, and the courage to take a chance on each other when it mattered most.